A veteran mechanic, one of those who have already seen thousands of cars go up on the lift, once told me a phrase that never left my mind. There is nothing more expensive than a cheap car. At the time I thought he was exaggerating, but over the years I understood that he was absolutely right, because there are cars that at the dealership seem like a bargain. Good price, attractive design, promises of reliability and low maintenance, but the miles go by and the problems begin. Engines that fail prematurely, transmissions that break without warning, electronics that seem designed to drive you crazy, and parts so fragile that one wonders if they were really meant to last more than a few years. Today I'm going to tell you about the 20 cars you should never buy if you don't want to end up cursing the day you signed the contract. And I warn you now, the number one on this list is so disastrous that in many workshops they directly call it a tin can with wheels. Let's begin. Number 20, Peugeot 307. When it came onto the market, the Peugeot 307 was received with enthusiasm. Modern design, a good level of comfort, and the feeling that it was a step forward compared to its predecessor. The problem is that this step went straight to the workshop. The great Achilles heel of the 307 was its electronics, instrument panels that shut off out of nowhere, engine sensors sending false data, warning lights turning on as if it were Christmas, without there actually being a clear fault. Added to this were problems with the rear suspension and power steering systems that, in some cases, stopped working without prior warning. Nothing inspires more confidence than turning the steering wheel and feeling that nothing happens. Did all of them turn out bad? No. But enough did for the 307 to earn a very negative reputation among mechanics. Today, many professionals directly recommend avoiding it on the second-hand market. Not because it's impossible to find a good one, but because the probability of inheriting problems is too high. Number 19, Renault Laguna. The Renault Laguna was born with a clear mission: to compete head-to-head in the mid-size sedan segment. Elegant, comfortable, well-equipped, and with a more affordable price than its German rivals. On paper, it seemed like an excellent idea. In practice, it was a nightmare, especially the second generation, which earned a terrible reputation in workshops. The famous start card instead of a key was a novelty, and also an endless source of problems. Drivers left stranded, unable to start the car, intermittent faults impossible to diagnose, lights coming on for no apparent reason. Many mechanics joked that the Laguna didn't need a battery, it needed an exorcism. On top of that came serious problems in diesel engines, especially in injectors and fuel systems, which began to fail around 100,000 kilometers. And when they failed, they did so with very unpleasant bills. Today it's no coincidence that you see Lagunas at ridiculously low prices. The market has already learned the lesson. Buying one means accepting a very intense relationship with the workshop. Number 18, Ford EcoSport. The Ford EcoSport was presented as the ideal compact SUV. Attractive design, competitive price, and the promise of versatility for everyday use. And yes, at first it was charming, but it only took a few thousand kilometers for reality to appear. Fragile interior plastics, poor fit and finish, noises everywhere. A car with less than 30,000 kilometers already looked like it had lived a decade. The famous side-opening rear door, which in photos seemed practical, in real life was uncomfortable and even dangerous in tight spaces. On a mechanical level, some small engines had serious issues, especially certain versions that suffered from overheating and coolant leaks, and not to mention some automatic gearboxes, which failed prematurely and cost a fortune to repair. The result was clear. What seemed like a smart purchase quickly turned into a bottomless pit of expenses. Number 17, Opel Meriva. The Opel Meriva seemed like the perfect solution for small families. Practical, compact, and with good interior modularity. The problem is that its reliability left much to be desired, especially the versions with automated manual gearboxes, which earned such a bad reputation that many mechanics directly advise avoiding them without discussion. Added to this were gasoline engines with excessive oil consumption and front suspensions that wore out much earlier than expected. The most ironic thing is that it was sold as a car designed to last. But once past the 100,000 kilometers mark, many owners were faced with bills that made any initial savings disappear. Number 16, Seat Cordoba. For years it was a very popular option in markets where affordable cars with the backing of a large automotive group were sought. But in practice, the Cordoba did not live up to expectations. Sluggish small engines, frequent failures of ignition coils and mass airflow sensors, and an interior quality that aged poorly from day one. Hard plastics, constant noises, and rather poor ride comfort. The problem was clear. To cut costs, too much was trimmed from key components. The result was a car that, with few kilometers, already felt old. Today, many Cordobas with less than 100,000 kilometers look as if they have lived twice that. Number 15. Hyundai Matrix. The Hyundai Matrix arrived on the market with a clear promise: practicality, space and reliability in a compact format. Even its design, signed by Pininfarina, tried to give it a European touch to make it more appealing. The problem is that beyond aesthetics, the car never fully convinced where it really matters: durability. The manual gearboxes showed premature wear, especially in clutches that could not withstand daily use. The gasoline engines began to suffer failures in coils and sensors much earlier than expected, and the electronics over time became unpredictable. But one of the most criticized points was rust. In several markets, the Matrix showed corrosion in key areas much earlier than normal, something unforgivable in a family-oriented car. In the end, the Matrix was marked as a model that promised practicality but aged poorly. A car that seemed like a good idea at first, and that over the years became a constant source of small and not so small problems. Number 14. Citroën C4 Picasso. The C4 Picasso was, without a doubt, a sales success. Spacious, comfortable, modern, and with an interior design that looked like it came from the future. But all that comfort had a hidden price. One of its biggest attractions, the rear pneumatic suspension in some versions, turned into a nightmare over time. When it began to fail, the repair cost so much that many owners directly considered selling the car. The diesel engines also caused trouble. Recurring problems with injectors, EGR valves and emissions control systems turned any visit to the workshop into a game of Russian roulette. And on an electronic level, the C4 Picasso built up an unenviable reputation. Delicate sensors, warning lights coming on without a clear reason, and systems that failed intermittently. It was comfortable, yes. It was spacious too. But maintaining it over the years could make any bank account tremble. Number 13. Chevrolet Cruze. The Chevrolet Cruze was presented as the ultimate global sedan. A car capable of competing with Japanese and European models, with a sober design and a balanced proposal. The reality was far less kind. Automatic gearboxes in several markets showed premature failures. Gasoline engines began to consume oil at a worrying rate as the kilometers added up. And although the interior seemed acceptable at first, the materials deteriorated far too quickly. The suspension didn't help either. On poorly maintained roads, components began to loosen before reaching 100,000 kilometers, generating constant noises and a feeling of accelerated wear. Over time, the Cruze earned a reputation for aging badly, and today, in the second-hand market, it is hard to sell precisely because of that. Buyers already know that behind the attractive price, there may be a long list of problems. Number 12. Daewoo Lanos. The Daewoo Lanos was one of those cars that sold by the thousands thanks to a single word: cheap. And yes, it was. But it was also a clear example that cheap can end up being very expensive. Its engines, although simple, suffered from constant oil leaks and gasket problems that appeared far too early. The gearboxes did not tolerate intensive use well, and the bodywork was so prone to rust that some looked like old cars with barely a few years on them. Buying a Lanos today is, quite simply, signing a sentence of constant visits to the workshop. And although its price on the second-hand market may seem tempting, the reality is that maintaining it ends up costing much more than it is worth. It is one of those cars that teaches you the lesson the hard way. Not everything that is cheap is worth it. Number 11. Lancia Libra. The Lancia Libra tried to position itself as an elegant and different alternative within the sedan segment. Italian design, a good level of comfort, and a more refined image than average. But beneath that appearance, there was a car full of poorly judged compromises. The diesel engines accumulated problems with injectors, turbos, and fuel systems. The electronics were, quite simply, a constant headache. Instrument clusters failing, temperamental climate control systems, and control units that seemed to have a mind of their own. On top of all this came an additional problem: parts. Finding specific spare parts was not always easy or cheap, which made any repair more expensive. Many describe it as a beautiful, comfortable car, but extremely ungrateful over time. Number 10. Fiat Punto. When the Fiat Punto appeared, it was seen as the ideal city car: compact, youthful, economical, and seemingly easy to maintain. The problem is that it was built with a fragility that many did not discover until it was too late. The Punto's suspension has a reputation for giving up with alarming ease. Just a few potholes, and let's be honest, in many countries that's an everyday occurrence, are enough for noises, play, and harsh knocks to begin. The clutch doesn't lag behind either. In many cases it wears out earlier than normal, even with calm driving. And the manual gearboxes over time start to sound like an old blender, especially in the lower gears. But where the Punto truly becomes exasperating is in the interior. Plastics that fade in the sun, buttons that stop responding, and controls that seem taken from a cheap toy. A customer at a workshop where an acquaintance of mine worked used to say that his Punto was like a chronic patient. They fixed one thing and a week later another problem appeared. If it was cared for with extreme attention, it could be stretched a bit. But most owners ended up tired before reaching 100,000 kilometers. That's why when you see one very cheap on the second-hand market, don't think it's an opportunity. It's a warning. Number 9. Chevrolet Aveo. The Chevrolet Aveo is one of those cars that deceive. At first glance it seems adequate, simple and economical. But as soon as you start adding miles, reality hits hard. The Aveo's engines are known for developing oil leaks almost from new. The automatic gearbox, in particular, is known for failing before 100,000 kilometers, and when it does, the repair usually costs more than the car itself. And then there's safety. A strong impact in an Aveo makes it clear that the structure was not designed to protect its occupants very well. A friend bought one as an economical car to go to work. By 70,000 kilometers, he was already spending as much on repairs as on fuel: water pumps, ignition coils, radiators. The Aveo does its job at first, but when the problems begin, you realize you bought a direct pass to the workshop. Number 8. Chrysler Sebring. If the Aveo is a quiet disappointment, the Chrysler Sebring is a loudly broken promise. It was sold as an elegant sedan, with American image and a sense of robustness. In photos, it looked imposing. In real life, it was another story. The Sebring's automatic transmissions are famous for failing without warning. One day it works perfectly. The next, there's no reverse or drive. The interiors, which looked luxurious in the brochure, aged miserably. Plastics that cracked in the sun, upholstery that came unstuck, and a general feeling of a cheap car disguised as premium. And the electronics, better not even talk about it. Windows that won't go up, dashboards that shut off by themselves, sensors that trigger lights when there's no real problem. In many workshops, seeing a Sebring come in with less than 100,000 kilometers was already cause for concern. They looked like cars that had lived through a war, lots of looks, little substance, a problematic marriage from day one. Number 7. Ford Ka. The Ford Ka was for years the quintessential city car. Small, friendly and affordable. The problem is that this charm didn't last long. The small engines, although simple, were not designed to last very long. Coolant leaks, rust on the underside of the chassis, and steering systems that creaked prematurely were common occurrences. The clutch couldn't handle much. The suspensions sagged easily, and the build quality left much to be desired. I've seen Ford Kas with barely 70,000 kilometers that looked like cars 3 times their age, and the worst part is that many parents bought them for their children thinking they were a safe and reliable option. Serious mistake. The Ka ends up being a small money-eating monster disguised as an economical car. Cheap to buy, expensive to maintain. Number 6. Jeep Compass, first generation. Here we enter delicate territory, because Jeep has always been synonymous with toughness, durability and vehicles capable of withstanding the worst. Precisely for that reason, the first generation Compass was a monumental disappointment. Many bought it believing they would have a Jeep for life. What they got was a car that seemed to have forgotten all of the brand's DNA. The main problem was its CVT transmission, a true mechanical nightmare. It didn't last long, failed without warning, and when it broke, the repair was so expensive that many owners chose to sell the car as it was. On top of that were mediocre quality interiors, plastics that aged poorly, and a general feeling of a cheap car sold as premium. I've seen Compasses with less than 100,000 kilometers that looked like they had lived through 3 wars. The Compass proved something very clear. Not everything that carries a legendary logo is a guarantee of reliability. Number 5. Nissan Frontier, problematic generations. And now we move on to a pickup, because many people believe that a truck is automatically synonymous with durability. In many cases it is, but not always. The Nissan Frontier from certain generations came out with a design flaw that marked it forever. The problem was in the automatic transmission. In some models, the transmission fluid mixed with the radiator coolant. The result was devastating. The transmission became contaminated and was rendered unusable. I've seen cases with less than 80,000 kilometers and completely dead transmissions. Replacing it cost thousands and thousands, sometimes almost the same as the total value of the vehicle. A customer who used his Frontier for work swore he would never buy the brand again after that experience. And he wasn't the only one. The sad part is that other generations of the Frontier were indeed very good, but the bad ones left a stain that still weighs on its reputation today. Number 4. Hyundai Elantra, problematic series. This case hurts because Hyundai in general has made very reliable cars, but the Elantra in certain series was a serious stumble. The most serious problem was excessive oil consumption. Some engines had factory defects that caused them to burn oil at an exaggerated rate. If the driver wasn't paying close attention, the engine could run out of lubrication and destroy itself in a matter of minutes. Imagine having to check the oil level as if it were fuel. On top of that came sporadic electrical failures, suspensions that aged quickly, and interior finishes that did not withstand the passage of time well. A mechanic friend used to call it the chameleon of the workshop, because it came in for any imaginable reason. And the owner never understood what was going on, because the car still looked relatively new. Hyundai fixed many of these problems later, but the Elantra's reputation in those series was already marked. Number 3. Chevrolet Captiva. Few SUVs have a reputation as bad as the Captiva. It was sold as the ideal family SUV, spacious, modern, and with a robust appearance. But beneath that facade hid a true nightmare. The diesel engines suffered from overheating problems. The automatic transmissions wore out prematurely, and the electronics seemed designed to fail right after the warranty ended. Customers arrived at the workshop convinced they had taken the best possible care of it. And even so, with less than 100,000 kilometers, they were already facing huge repairs. Interiors that peeled, constant noises, and fuel consumption that made wallets cry. Many mechanics agree that it is one of the worst SUVs that have passed through their hands. Number 2. Chrysler PT Cruiser. This is one of the most controversial cases on the list. The PT Cruiser was a car that divided opinions from day one. Its retro design won many people over, but mechanically, it was a disaster. Constant overheating problems, fragile transmissions, chaotic electrical systems, and absurdly complicated repairs. Changing a simple water pump could turn into a nightmare. The suspension was weak, noises appeared quickly, and owners usually arrived at the workshop already resigned. They knew another big bill was on the way. One mechanic summed it up perfectly. The PT Cruiser is like a toxic relationship. At first it excites you, then it ruins you. Number 1. Dodge Neon. And we've reached the worst of them all. The car that no mechanic recommends, the one that earned its bad reputation without anyone's help. The Dodge Neon was sold as a youthful, cheap and modern sedan. In practice it was a total failure. Fragile engines, cylinder head gaskets that failed chronically, transmissions with a ridiculously short service life. The interiors looked like they came from a toy. Hard plastics, parts that broke just by looking at them, and finishes that came unstuck in the heat. The electronics didn't escape either. Faulty sensors, failing lights, computers with constant errors. A mechanic with more than 20 years of experience once told me something devastating. I stopped accepting Neons in the workshop. Every repair was a headache, and the customer always ended up spending more than the car was worth. That says it all. The Neon represents exactly what you don't want in a car. Unreliable, fragile, with no resale value and an endless list of problems. These cars are proof that not everything cheap is worth it, and that many times a bargain is just a well-disguised trap. If you ever owned one of these models, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And if you didn't, hopefully this video has saved you from making an expensive mistake. Now I want to read you. Which car did you own that turned out so bad you swore never to buy that brand again? Leave it in the comments, give it a like and subscribe. At Motor Hacks, we're always going to tell the truth about cars, even if it hurts.